Spiritual warfare and spirit guides. What is going on? My name is Dakota, and while I saw angels for the first time when I was 8 years old, I met my first demon when I was in middle school, and it didn't go how you might expect. First, he was my friend. Please enjoy this cautionary tale of how I handled a demon when I was in middle school, and an experience I had later on about spirit guides that revealed the truth. And it all has to do with Jesus is King. I hope you enjoy.
In heaven, I saw angels, Jesus, and beauty everywhere I looked. But on earth, I saw a lot of darkness as well, especially going through the public school system. Middle school was particularly tough on me. While my spiritual life was expanding rapidly, my social life seemed to shrink. I had a lot of trouble connecting deeply with anyone around me. As an adult, I now know that it was totally normal for middle school me to struggle to make good friends. But at the time, I felt alone. To pass the time and stave off the feeling of isolation, I started opening my spiritual eyes more and more around the school. I began seeing angels following and guarding different students. Some angels guarded students who I knew didn't want God in their life. It confused me. I asked God about this one morning on the bus driving into school. God, why do students who don't want you or Jesus in their life have angels around them? God answered me, speaking to my heart. Prayer is at work here. Some of those students haven't prayed for my help, but their mothers have. Their mothers pray for protection and for heavenly guidance for their children. Angels feed off of this prayer. While I am the true source of strength, and no angel would exist without me, a prayer from a person can boost an angel's strength in this world. The more prayer an angel is a part of, the more influence an angel can potentially have in the physical world. To be honest, this surprised me. I had thought that while prayer was good for talking with God, it didn't hold any real power spiritually except for making a person feel better. I viewed angels, Jesus, and God as the truly powerful beings, and I was simply blessed to be in their presence. But as I began to discover, that is not how angels, Jesus, and God saw me. They all saw me as someone with a great deal of power. One evening after school, my mom and I went to my middle school for a parent-teacher conference. Right before we left, my mom saw my music teacher and snagged him into a conversation while we stood in the auditorium. My mother was the kind of woman who could talk with someone for hours. But as a 13-year-old, I became bored. Instead of listening to them discuss the middle school music program, I took a seat in the middle section of the auditorium, absently stared upwards at the large stage with 40-foot ceilings, and I opened my spiritual eyes. It didn't take me long to see an angel hovering above a seat on the left side of the auditorium. This angel looked similar to the first angels I had ever seen in my dining room, with a few changes. His hair was blonde, but a bit browner than those first angels. He was tall and thin, with a tan tunic that draped down above his toes. I believe he had a satchel across his shoulder as well. This angel didn't acknowledge me at first. He lightly stood up and then stepped up onto the back of the seat so I could see all of him. With dainty lightness of foot, he tiptoed on the back of the seats one by one, heading towards the left auditorium wall until he ran out of seats. Curiously, without making a noise, I watched. Instead of hopping down from the seat, he jumped up into the air. As if he rode an invisible flying carpet, I watched the angel start flying around the edge of the auditorium. My head swiveled with him as he circled nonchalantly. He was different than the other angels. He rose up towards the ceiling and lazily began a descent again. I kept watching him, my mother's voice still chatting happily away behind me. The angel floated down until he reached the edge of the stage and stepped onto it. Now, he still didn't say anything to me, but he turned and looked at me with a slight smile and a twinkle in his eye. I was intrigued. I stood up from my seat and started to make my way towards the stage, taking the eye contact as an invitation. As I approached, the angel suddenly began to grow. His body and legs stretched upward. He grew from 6 feet tall to 16 feet tall. He didn't grow proportionally, so he simply got skinnier and longer. I stopped about 10 feet away from the stage, and he began to shrink again, like he was playing with his height. Then, once he returned to 6 feet tall, he began to grow again. After a couple of interesting rounds of tall, short, I finally spoke to him. "Who are you?" I asked. He smiled. "I'm the angel assigned to this school." "Oh, cool," I said. He wasn't necessarily assigned to a person, but this place. And I knew my middle school needed angels. "Why are you so relaxed?" I asked him. I had finally figured out what was so different about him. All the other angels I had encountered on earth were so serious, but here he was smiling, like he was ready to joke around. He was already easier to talk with compared to other angels. The angel shrugged. "I'm not on duty." "Oh," I said, and then furrowed my brow. "But you are here in the school. If you're on Earth, doesn't that mean you are on duty?" "Well, there's not a threat here right now," he responded. I nodded. That made sense. I was the only person in here aside from my mom and music teacher. We chatted for a few more minutes. I don't remember expressly what we talked about, but when it was time to go home and my mom and I left the building, I felt like I had made a friend. In the car, I looked back at my school before we left the parking lot and saw the same angel on the roof. I lifted up my hand and waved to him. He waved his whole arm and waved back. I smiled. The next couple of weeks, I actively looked for my new angel friend around the school and saw him regularly. Sometimes on my way to my next class, he'd join me as I walked down the hallway. It was cool to have another secret friend that no one else really knew about. Our conversations were brief but friendly. Once in the lunchroom, I saw him standing behind a small kid who was talking to a semicircle of larger children. It might have been a bullying situation, but I wasn't sure. The angel saw me and lifted his hand, waving for a second before focusing again on the child in front of him. I smiled and went back to my lunch, satisfied that the kid was being taken care of by the school's angel. As the days went on, I noticed the angel getting bigger. Obviously, from my first encounter, I knew he could change his height. While he certainly got taller, he also started to fill out as well, possibly getting more powerful in the school. One night at home, I told my mom about this new middle school angel. "He's really cool, Mom, but I still don't understand why he's so relaxed. No other angel relaxes on Earth." My mom, who always took the time to listen to me, shrugged. "Maybe you should ask God about him," she encouraged. I sat back on my bed. Oh yeah, I thought. That made sense. I should just ask God directly. A couple more nights went by before I did. Alone in my room, my homework completed, I sat again on my bed and closed my eyes. I asked God if I could come visit him. Within one breath, God spiritually showed me his hand, scooped me up, and brought me into the throne room. I was a little breathless at the fast transition. A beautiful pink blanket of clouds lay just outside the edge of heaven. It cast the whole throne room in a rosy golden light. It was so peaceful. I sat on God's lap as he sat on his throne. I let my eyes gently scan the scene, God's shining face behind me. After a few minutes of taking in the beauty, I turned to look up at God. "God, why is the new angel I met at school so relaxed? He seems different than all the other angels." God's answer was very simple. He has free will. I looked down, trying to put the pieces together. The way God said it made it seem like there was a classification of angels who had free will, although most of them did not. For some reason, the idea of most angels not having free will didn't bother me, but I'll get to that later. However, the concept of this angel having free will made sense in the way he carried himself. He didn't seem like a soldier. He was too relaxed for that. I kept thinking about this as I let my spirit drift down from heaven back to my body and then to sleep. A couple days later, my entire grade was interrupted from our regular classes to go watch the school play. A bunch of my friends had worked really hard on the play, so I was glad I was able to watch their performance. Plus, I was generally happy to be out of class. I remember my entire grade filed out of our classrooms together, the hallways full of rowdy middle schoolers moving in the same direction. I had paired up with a couple of my friends. We all agreed to sit together on the way to the auditorium. Just as the arrangement was made, I felt a small shift in energy around me. I opened my spiritual eyes to see what was happening. The relaxed angel popped up next to me on my left side, matching my pace with a smile. He had grown enormously since I met him. He was now over 10 feet tall and strode with a certain confidence that I hadn't seen in him before. "How are you?" I asked him, silently, with my spiritual voice. I was happy to see him. He shrugged. "I'm good. Can I hang out with you now?" I nodded yes and looked forward. And then the strangest feeling came over me, like my world darkened for a moment. I furrowed my brow, my thoughts suddenly racing. If this angel has free will, that means he doesn't have God's will. My eyes widened and I began to panic. He is not of God. I kept walking forward, my eyes as round as dinner plates, trying to pretend that nothing had changed. My pupils flitted left and right, suddenly acutely aware of how close the spiritual creature was to me and to my friends. What did it want? How had I not realized this before? What was I supposed to do now? Well, if he's not an angel, then he must be a demon, I thought. My spine became rigid, but I had no choice other than to keep walking and hope this demon, pretending to be an angel, didn't realize that I knew what he was. He said something to me, but I didn't respond. I just kept moving forward. In my peripheral vision, I saw him leaning down as we walked, closer to my face, like he was studying me. We rounded the corner of the hallway, still amidst 100 other children. Just as I caught sight of the auditorium doors, I felt another shift. He knows that I know, I realized. Oof, there was no more pretending. The spiritual air seemed to darken, and all I could feel on my left side was his presence, becoming more oppositional by the second. Just as I passed through the auditorium doors into the theater, I allowed myself to look up at him. My blood froze. His eyes were already locked onto mine. His pupils had transformed into the dot of a Sharpie marker. As if an invisible flashlight was lit under his chin, the shadows of his face were strained and unnatural. And he smiled. As I looked at him, his smile actively stretched upwards in a grotesque curve, far too wide and too close to his ears. It reminded me of the Cheshire Cat of Alice in Wonderland, except this was real. With a tiny gasp, I felt frozen, incapable of action. My feet followed my friends into our predetermined seats. I found myself in the very back row of the auditorium in a center section, 3 seats from the right aisle. My 2 friends were the only buffer between myself and the terrifying demon who positioned himself next to our row, staring at me. He did not move nor waver. He blocked my only possible escape and was threateningly close to my friends, as well as me. I didn't know what to do. The lights in the auditorium dimmed and the play began. I believe we were watching Into the Woods, but I couldn't pay attention, even though I pretended to. What was I supposed to do? How could I let this happen? I berated myself. I was supposed to be the one with spiritual sight. I depended on myself to see truth where others could not. And yet I had been deceived with my own sight. How could I let this happen? I glanced at the demon, and he had only gotten worse. The smile had deepened, and his teeth had transformed into 2 rows of shark teeth, jutting out unnaturally from his lips. He inched closer to me, practically stepping on my friend Natalie, who was seated next to the aisle. I leaned forward around my other friend, frantically searching Natalie's face. She felt nothing. She absently watched the middle school actors on stage, unknowingly staring through a demon's hip. I didn't know what was better, her sensing the demon or not. I was terrified and nothing was getting better. I closed my eyes and focused on my breathing. What was I supposed to do? My angels, I suddenly remembered. They had to be here. My eyelids shot open, searching for them. At first, all I saw was the same demon, his smile still disgustingly large. But somehow I pressed myself to look deeper. At the time, I wasn't sure how I did it, but I found them. Like figures stepping out of an invisible fog, my angels appeared to me. They had been there the whole time, yet I had not seen them. All 4 had surrounded the demon, their weapons drawn. Any move the demon made was matched with swords and spears. But why weren't they doing more? Maybe I need to give them permission, I thought to myself. I looked over at my angelic army of 4 and quietly mouthed the words, "In Jesus' name, escort this demon out of the school." The angels each took a decisive step in closer to the demon, but the actual demon held his ground. He stared at me menacingly. I frantically looked between my 4 angels, who were focused, but seemed incapable of more action. Why hadn't it worked? If my angels couldn't remove him, then what else was there? I glanced again at the demon. He was tense, like the angels intimidated him, but his beady eyes kept a laser focus on me. As creepy as this was, it gave me a clue. My pastors often preached about taking authority over the forces of darkness in my life. They said I was capable of casting out demons the same way Jesus had. I closed my eyes again in the darkness of the theater. It was up to me. I opened my eyes and looked directly at the demon. His smile was fixed, but his shoulders rose up like he was ready for me. This time, I whispered the words directly to him. "In Jesus' name, demon, leave this school and do not return." I could see his body begin to quake, as if the air around him began to boil. Something was happening, but was it enough? Suddenly, out of my peripheral vision to my left, I saw movement. I turned my head around behind me to see the spiritual essence of the auditorium doors burst wide open as a distraught angel ran through. This angel raced in and partially down the left aisle. He slid to a stop and his head whipped back and forth like he was looking for someone. When his eyes settled on me, he gasped and brought his fists up to his face, covering his mouth. He was terrified of the situation I found myself in. I gulped and turned my head back around. The demon had come in closer. He was fully in front of Natalie, wedged between Natalie's knees and the seat in front of us, his arm dangling in front of my other friend. Now he was only 2 steps away from me. It hadn't worked. My heart pounded in dread. Fear paralyzed me. Unable to escape, I closed my eyes. Whenever I felt far from God, music brought me back to him. So, under my breath, all my peers casually watching the play, I began to sing to myself. I sang all my favorite worship songs from church. It wasn't the song that held any magic, but the feeling the song produced in me that I was after. My heartbeat began to slow, and my face began to relax. I focused on God and his goodness, and on how with God nothing seemed to be an emergency. I felt reminded of his presence in me, and I felt peace. I could do this. After 5 to 10 minutes of singing to myself, I let my eyes open. None of my peers noticed anything was wrong. The scene was much the same, spiritually and physically. I looked at the demon again, and my eyes hardened. "In Jesus' name, demon, leave this school and never return." The only difference from before to now was how I felt about things. I said my words as quiet as I could, with peace and finality. I wasn't waiting to see what happened. Because of God's authority in me, I knew the final outcome. I saw the demon's shoulders begin to quake again. The skin on his face seemed to harden, and his smile taking on a disjointed shape, and for a split second, his skin cracked down the middle of his face. With the speed of a blink, the demon suddenly shrunk down to 3 feet tall, covered in a black tunic and hood. I blinked as the tiny spirit spun around with flailing arms and sprinted as fast as he could out at the auditorium doors. It shouted and screamed at a very high pitch, like a rabid dog was chasing him. My angels instantly followed, finally able to follow my command of escorting the demon out of the school. I twisted around in my seat, watching. The auditorium doors were a straight shot from the front doors of the school, so I was able to watch as the demon bolted unceremoniously from the property, never to return. 2 of my angels followed him, but the 2 feminine angels floated back to me. As they returned, taking their place on either side of my shoulders, I breathed deeply and turned around in my seat. There was no sign of the terrified angel who had run in here, but I wasn't concerned. I had found my authority. The play continued as I processed what had happened. When I told my mom later that night what happened to me, she was astonished, to say the least. After Congratulating me on chastising the demon and sending it away, she asked some more questions. Why didn't you know he was a demon? She asked, concerned. I looked down, my insecurity flooding back. I shrugged. I don't know, I answered. That part scared me the most. I couldn't tell the difference between angel and demon, then how could I stop this from happening again? I knew God and I had a lot to talk about. When I got to heaven that night, a bunch of angels greeted me. They had on simple tunics and headscarves. In their hands, they held special washcloths inlaid with gold, interwoven with healing fabrics. I believe they were nurse angels. They took my hands and wiped me down with the cloths as well as my face. I didn't feel sweaty, but they must have seen something I didn't. Their greeting only lasted a few seconds before they let me continue towards God in the throne room. I found myself hoisted up onto his lap as I was already asking questions. God, what happened? What did he want? I asked, referring to the demon. Oh, God took me in both hands, which made me feel like a little bird in a bowl before he answered. I believe it was that night's version of a hug. Dakota, I am so proud of you. Let me explain what happened. All angels get their power from me, and because I made you in my image, that means you have power too, more so than any angel. But the thing is, at one point, all angels had free will. Unfortunately, some angels took that free will and cast me aside. They said they didn't need me, God, anymore. They wanted to be the source of their own power instead of relying on the power I freely gave them. They chose to leave heaven and make their own kingdom. A third of my angels left me, attempting to be the source of their own life while on earth. But, like a great tree uprooted from the river that fed it, without me, those fallen angels soon began to dry up. They lost their luster, the rest of their compassion, and their shape. In essence, they were losing their life, but as eternal beings, they couldn't die. The rest of the angels who stayed with me made their decision too. 2/3 of my angels and I watched the tragedy of our lost brothers and sisters. Never wanting any more angels to go through this kind of endless death below, I took the remaining angels' free will to give them my will. I tricked no one. I gave all angels the chance to leave, to keep their free will if they so desired. I also gave the fallen angels the chance to come back. Only a few did. Strangely, the fallen angels could barely see what a terrible life they had chosen. They still believed they could achieve life without me, like a seed believing it doesn't need water. Every angel chose their fate, either with me or without me. What you faced today was one such fallen angel. Many people now call them demons. I was wide-eyed at this explanation. I didn't have time to formulate a response, but God wasn't done yet. He went on. Every demon still selfishly wishes for power, but without me, they have to find it elsewhere. Humans are created in my image, even more so than angels are. Every human is naturally gifted with divine power that stays with them their whole lives. Humans are like streams, and I am the river. When a stream connects with a river, the stream and the river only grow bigger together the longer they are connected. The only difference is, you, and all people, can choose who or what to connect yourself to. The demons are hoping that you will choose to connect with them and give them the power they so desperately seek. I was quiet for what seemed like a long time. Finally, I asked, how would I choose to give them power? By believing in them. I lost myself in thought, putting all this together. Angels were once faced with the same choice as all people, to accept God or not. Those that chose to live without God turned into spiritual leeches. But that still didn't explain how I had been fooled into thinking a demon was a real angel. I looked up at God, my desperate question on my face. He shifted his hands, allowing me to gently sit back and lean against his fingers as my backrest. He continued. That demon, and many demons, have learned to shape-shift in their quest for power. For a short time, they can appear like something they are not. Some demons can appear like their former heavenly selves or like a friend. They use illusion and lies to get you to believe in them. I thought back on my experience and the pieces started falling into place. The first time I had seen that demon, he had simply tried to keep my attention. When he at first appeared like an angel, I had instantly believed that he was good. He playfully hopped and floated around the auditorium, doing just enough to keep my interest. Then, the more curious I got, the more power he received. He had started shape-shifting in front of me. He changed his height multiple times on the stage, from short to tall and back again. That was when I spoke to him. When he told me that he was an angel assigned to my middle school, I believed him to be an ally. I believed in him. That was when he got his power. I thought back on how my 4 guard angels had looked powerless against him once everything had been revealed. Did that mean that angels weren't powerful? But even as I thought it, I understood what had happened. Yes, my angels had plenty of power. Normally, they would have cast away the likes of him without me even knowing he was there. But when I approached the demon, things changed. By speaking to that demon in the auditorium, I gave him permission to latch on to me. At that point, I superseded my own angel's authority. That was why it had been up to me to stop him. He had been using me, and probably all the other kids he interacted with, for power. No wonder he grew bigger over the weeks I talked to him. He was drinking up my power from God. I felt angry, used, and indignant. I looked up to God. How do I stop this from happening again? By this point, my brain was already brimming with the new information. My spiritual hearing was growing hazy, and God's voice was beginning to sound fuzzy and muted. I just couldn't take in much more material. God knew that, so he tried to answer me, but I just couldn't hear him. As frustrating as that was, when I drifted back to Earth, I knew I needed sleep. Well, I'm going to pause here and give you guys a summary of these last pages because I have another story that I also want to tell you. So that was a lot. I experienced it in middle school. And it informed a lot of my walk with God because so much of my walk had been so positive, and seeing angels in heaven, and I got to see that side of it. I think especially that time, those few weeks in middle school, really showed me, I think, what a lot of other people with spiritual gifts see first. They see a lot of times the darkness first, and that makes me so sad. But there is an answer to being able to tell the difference between an angel and a demon, and I call it the test. And I write about it further in the Heaven book, and it's found in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. And the what is written is kind of a way to test, which teachings do we listen to, but it also works spiritually. And the question is, did Jesus Christ come in the flesh? Now, what is so interesting is that I was reading the Bible when I found this, and it was absolutely amazing to me. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to use it. And so I started everything that I would see, and I still use it to this day. Spiritually, I asked, did Jesus Christ come in the flesh? What is so fascinating is that even though we all know that anything from the devil is a liar and a thief and will not tell the truth, right? Amazingly, they cannot lie when I ask this sort of identity question. I've never, ever had a demon lie. I get three answers to this sort of question when I ask, did Jesus Christ come in the flesh? And the first is, I'll get a yes. I'll get a resounding, huge yes. And sometimes this yes is so big that I feel like when an angel says it back, it's like my heart, like I can feel a reverberation because the power of that yes. Like if it's an angel of God, they will let you know they are an angel of God and they are proud to be an angel of God. But I get 2 other responses. And the one response, I'll get a no, and that's clearly not of God. Sometimes they'll get really angry when I say that. And the third response I'll get is a sort of try to ignore, like pretend they didn't hear me, maybe continue doing what they were doing, maybe even try to get closer to me. And because basically they're just trying to keep my attention for a little bit longer to take a little bit more power. So this test has never failed me. And for anybody that is starting to see spiritually or has been seeing spiritually in a long time, I encourage you to test everything. Um, Now there is another story. Oh, I see these good questions. There is another story that I'm going to share. And oh, and by the way, I now am very strong in my authority of God, and it's because I have experience and really faith. It started from faith, and then using my faith, I gained experience. I am very confident in casting out anything that's not of God. I don't want to talk to anything that's not of God. I've made that decision. As a with my spiritual gifts, God and I have talked about this a lot. I do have the option. I could use my gifts to talk to things that are not of God, and I have chosen that's just not what I'm interested in. That's just not what I'm interested in. So I always I only speak to those that are of God. Now, an interesting thing happened. This is the story I haven't shared anywhere else. So a long time ago, many months ago, I guess it's not that long ago, I had a client who had a little dog. And I think my client was definitely in the New Age movement. So a lot of people who are kind of in New Age are really just open. And I kind of like that about them, but there's serious drawbacks to it too, which I'll describe in a moment. Um, yes, you can. Manda just asked, can you cast out demons remotely? That's a quick answer. Yes, absolutely you can. Okay, so I had this client into the New Age movement, so she was excited to talk to her dog, and I reached out to her dog, and her dog was like a little copy of her human. Like they were like so on the same page, it was almost problematic. Like problem was that this little dog would bite anybody that her human didn't like. And so she just felt like enmeshed, like it's her job to protect her human, and her human would bite any too. Like there's no problem with it. So we had to kind of explain, like, you are a separate being. And you need to restrain yourself. And by the way, your human can take care of herself. She doesn't need you doing it all the time. So that was interesting. But this fascinating thing that I really was not expecting happened in the call. I was speaking with this dog, and I was trying to explain to her, like, you are separate from your like you're connected, but you need to understand you are not the same. And it was fascinating. I've never seen an animal and a human so enmeshed that it was problematic. But this little dog was having trouble with this concept. And she even took it to the point, this dog, she's probably like, I don't know, 10 pounds. She even took it to the point that she didn't feel hungry unless her person was hungry. Like she wouldn't even eat for herself. And again, you can see how problematic that is. So as she's struggling to understand this concept of separateness, this little dog goes, I'm going to consult my spirit guide. And I have never heard that one before. So I was like, okay. And so this little dog disconnects with me, and like she's going to talk to something else. And I tell her owner what's going on, and this woman is like, oh, that's me. I always talk to my spirit guides. That's where she's getting it from. And I go, okay, this makes a little more sense. So I try to reconnect with the dog, but as I do, I get the sense of something else she's talking to. Like it was weird. It was weird. But this dog talks to the spirit guide, and she gets this advice. So she comes back to me, kind of disconnects from her spirit guide. I didn't try to interfere with what was going on because I really didn't know what was going on. And this dog says to me that the spirit guide had given her some advice, and it made sense for her, this dog. And she was like, okay, I understand now. There is a kind of separateness that I need to live with, but I can still be really close with my person. So it helped the dog. I bring it back to the person. She's like, yep, that makes so much sense. And we have a great session. And then we ended, and everyone seemed to be helped. And I don't know. I didn't know. That was a first for me, especially an animal reaching out to this sort of thing. So kind of time goes by, and I keep, especially as I start posting on social media, I keep hearing about spirit guides, and like that's like the new thing. And that wasn't a thing when I was a teenager, but it totally is now. Or at least it wasn't a popular thing when I was a teenager. So I go up and I ask God about it, like what's going on with this. And God said, well, Dakota, first of all, he's trying to build up my own intuition about things. He goes, Dakota, what do you think? And I go, my suspicion is that these are not of God. These are probably, from my experience, demons that are have an opportunity, and if you look to them for advice, then they're getting energy from you, and so they're getting what they want, and you don't even know, if you've opened up to a spirit guide, that they're leeching off of you. And basically God was, Now, what's interesting is I do think that someone can just happen upon a spirit guide that could be an angel. But the thing about the New Age movement is they're so open to everything. You don't know what's what. You don't know if something is good for you, or something that just wants to use you and can dress it up. So here's the interesting part of this experience. Once I had this talk with God where he was like validating my intuition about what was going on, I then had this thought. I was like, well, there was that one sort of spirit guide that I talked to. And something fascinating for me is like, with animal communication, I'm good at picking up the connection now. Well, as I was thinking about this experience I had with that one little dog, and at the time I had felt that dog's connection with her spirit guide, I accidentally connected with that same spirit guide. It was almost like I was calling its name. And okay, I'm going to take a second on this one. This is fascinating. And what's really interesting right now, guys, I'm also feeling something in my fingertips. So I feel like we're moving something by me telling this story. I feel like something's moving spiritually. And that's not bad. I'm just aware of it. I'm very, very aware of it. And that's another thing too. Whenever I talk about something God's power and what is this demonic energy, it's not necessary. It's almost like stirring the waters, but sometimes things need to be stirred, and sometimes things need to be stirred off of you. So I am okay with this, but I am definitely feeling something in my fingertips right now. All right, well, back to this story with this spirit guide. So I saw it, and the image that I saw was this like gigantic purple, like round. It almost looked like a giant plushie, like huge plushie of some kind, and little arms. It was purple. It kind of looked. I guess it was. It would have looked cute if I wasn't so suspicious, right? And so it turned. It felt this energy. It looked at me and it smiled. There wasn't really anything wrong with it. And I asked, did Jesus Christ come in the flesh? Because that is the only thing I will say to spirits that I haven't identified yet. And it looked at me, it kept the smile, and it took another step forward, and it didn't answer. That's already enough. But I asked one more time, did Jesus Christ come in the flesh? And when I was very strong, like, I'm not talking to you until you answer this question, it started to change. And how do I describe it? It kind of like, I don't know, like a sneer, I guess. And like it answered like really slowly, like almost like it was pulling my question was almost like pulling the word from it, went no. And I could feel the energy with that question behind this facade of the cute purple fluffy spirit guide. And I think, well, it's not a mistake because I learned from it, but I was so fascinated after that. I sort of just like, I backed off, but I didn't completely let go of the connection. And I see, you can hear me in my voice. I kind of wish I hadn't done that, but I know better now. And at least I can tell you guys what happened. I was so fascinated. I kept the connection. And when it could feel I had kept the connection, it at first had, after saying no, I backed off a little bit, didn't drop it completely. I saw this purple thing sort of turn away and go to a group of others. So I think it was like communing with others in a way. And then other spirit guides, or I'm saying spirit guides, really I mean demons, but I'm just using this label for now. And because I didn't fully drop the connection, it could feel it. It turned around, and at that point, everything had changed about its look. And it was just evil coming out of its eyes. Like it was angry. It wanted to not even hurt me, like just take me out, basically. And it turned around at that time, and I saw it run towards me with that evil energy. And I know because I stayed connected, I guess I had put my finger in a pot it shouldn't have been in. Well, the good news is I immediately called out to God, and God, I felt like my own spirit, because I I went from my attention on this thing to God, and from that, I felt it was almost like God took His hand in my middle section and just like pulled me right on out of there, and pulled me away from that connection. And from that, I mean, really, he saved me, and He will do that. No matter how many times I may have tried to interrogate the darn demon, God would have saved me the moment that I reached out to Him. And I said, I took a moment. He brought me back to the throne room, and I think I just stood like quietly for a minute, like, whoa, I hadn't been. I don't know. There was a lot to process. This was something that was supposed to be a spirit guide. It was definitely a demon in this case, and it wanted to hurt me. And it did not take much for the facade to fall away. And so I just stood quietly for a minute, and then I looked at God, and I said, what do I do? I now know it's out there. I know it's even attached to my client, but she wants it. I don't think she knows. I'm not even sure she'd be open to someone saying like that is not of God. So like now I know I have the power to cast it out remotely. I can do that. So God, what do I do? Do I just like leave it alone, or do I do something with it? And this has been also a question too. If the person that the demon is originally attached to doesn't want the healing or doesn't want to be released, can you release them, right? Because it's their own choice to keeping them back. But I have a choice too. I just had a not okay interaction, and I don't want that thing around anybody. So it's this predicament. And God told me, Dakota, you absolutely have the power to cast that thing out. And He actually encouraged me to do so and to use my words. What He did tell me is that when there are, and when I say cast out, I mean cast away from people. And there's that power to do that as well. So I used my authority in Christ, and I said, in Jesus's name, demon, be gone. I think it was like, be gone to the depths of hell or something, like go back to hell. It's like a holding space for the demons. And unfortunately, because they're eternal, they sort of just wait for like a vulnerable human being, and they eventually can sort of climb back out, I think, because another person has used their God-given authority to bring them back out. But that doesn't have to do with my life. Again, it's all about choice. So I cast that thing away from my client. Now, I haven't heard from her. She hasn't booked another session again, but I know what I saw. And and God told me that, yes, you have the authority, but when a person has not chosen to depart, they don't want to participate in the casting out, or they think it's still good, then it's almost like the door to the house is still open. And so that's why last week I shared the story of casting these demons out of Luke. And he sat with me and he agreed that he didn't want this anymore, and that I could pray over him. And he felt a difference afterwards, and he's not open to that. But an interesting thing about Luke is I asked him also last week, are you a Christian? And he goes, actually, no, he's not a Christian. He doesn't consider himself a Christian. And this is another thing. I educated him. I said, well, it is your choice, but just know that your cup is empty now. But that also means there's going to be these other demons that are looking for an opportunity to fill you back up. And if you're filled with Christ, there's just not that much room, or maybe no room for them anymore. But the thing is, Luke was abused by his father in the name of the Bible. And so to take a lifetime of abuse and then have, he's known me for 2 years, but really to have like this really deep interaction that was just like one afternoon, and say, okay, are you ready for Jesus now? Does not compute. He's got more healing, and he has to go longer to realize the God that he learned about from his father is not the God who loves him, is not the God that created him. And so he's got longer to go. Whew. So there is a lot here, and I'm going to take a big deep breath after sharing my stories, and now we're going to go through some questions. Okay. Ooh, it's like a chat bar. I don't have to tilt my head for. This is so nice. Okay, so here's a great question. There's a bunch of great questions here. Okay, so I'm going to go down. So Madison, in the beginning of the call, asked, "Are spirit guides different than angels?" They can be. But I do also believe that there are some spirit guides that are angels. And if you're not sure, just use the test. Did Jesus Christ come in the flesh? And and if you have this ability to spiritually hear, I think even if you can't hear, you often kind of feel something back. Or if you feel nothing, that might be a sign as well. But that answer, you're going to get a resounding yes if this is an angel of God. And if not, I strongly advise not to interact with that being. Are elemental spirits of the universe of God? I'm going to have to study this one. I don't know the answer to this one. Is there a difference between unclean spirits and fallen angels? Nephilim and Genesis 6:4. What is the difference between fallen angels chained in the abyss and others that are not? And when an unclean spirit is cast out, can we cast them to the abyss or another place on earth like Jesus sent to the pigs? Yes. Okay. So I only know half of the answers to these questions. And part of this is because I don't spend my life studying the dark side of things. I study heaven and Jesus and angels, but it is important to know at least for me, some basics, I call it, to be able to be safe and navigate this. So I'll tell you the answers I don't know. A difference between unclean spirits and fallen angels, I don't know the answer to that. The difference between fallen angels chained in the abyss and others that are not, I don't know the answer to this. I also have not seen demons chained in the abyss. However, I also haven't seen hell that much. There is an abyss in hell. Absolutely, I have seen that. And by the way, when I saw hell, God didn't even let me go inside. There was like this space. It was something important for me to see, and He had me outside of hell looking in. So I have never been to hell technically, but I have seen it. All right. And so when an unclean spirit, I'm just going to say demon because that's how I understand it, is cast out, can we cast them to an abyss or another place on earth like Jesus sent to the pigs? Okay, so this is a good question, and I just learned something on this last week. So sending them to somewhere is really, really helpful. And I used to have a youth pastor who would, tell us about casting out spirits, and he goes, "And send that demon to the hell." And he would, rile everyone up. And but honestly, it was a really good phrase to use, because when you use your authority and you say, "In Jesus' name, be gone and be cast out," you can say where they go. Now, when you cast them to hell, there's not really people there. Hell is not nearly as full as we were taught to believe. And so there's not a lot of sources of energy for them there. So they can just rot away for a long time. Now they can, if they do happen spiritually, maybe a person spiritually reaches out to something and they feel that connection, then that's their ticket out, because they're borrowing that human being's energy to then get back out of the pit. So they're eternal. They can stay there for quite a long time. So as far as I know, that's really the best place to send them. Now, what's so fascinating about Jesus casting out demons and sending them into the pigs. Okay, so if you guys don't know the Bible story, I'll try and go over it real quick. I think I remember, it's been a minute since I read it, but there was a man who had like a legion of demons within him, and he was just the town terror. And Jesus came upon him and he said, "In Jesus' name, demons be gone." And the demons spoke, "But where are we gonna go?" And Jesus said, "Well, fine, go into the herd of pigs." And they went into the herd of pigs, and the pigs went wild and ran themselves over a cliff. That's how I remember the story. So I just had another experience last week, which gave me more insight onto this, because I had a client who, she was calling me about her pet, but as we were talking, I just knew I needed to open my spiritual eyes, and on the camera behind her, I saw a demon, and it was big. It had like a very depression sort of energy, which kind of matched with what she was going through. And so I told my client about it, and I said, "Can we pray?" And she goes, "Absolutely." She'd been through a lot in her life, so it wasn't necessarily surprising. So we prayed that thing off of her, and it turned out she also was sort of like open to other spirits. But after we talked and was like, no, I don't think that was good for you. She's like, all right, the doors are closed then. So she had kind of opened her home to this stuff too. So we prayed it off. And then she also told me, and it worked. I saw that thing get sucked away. And it was fascinating because she was in, I think, California. I'm in North Carolina, but that didn't matter. The authority goes over any distance. Well, then she said the whole neighborhood is really in a terrible place. And I go, all right, we're going to pray over the whole neighborhood. So let me tell you, after we prayed that prayer, it worked. It worked for sure. And she felt better in her own home. And I heard like this, like howling, screaming sound of them leaving. And what was so fascinating is that after the call, you know, she was better. We had prayed. She was more aligned and felt better and all that stuff. But I get off the call, and I'm someone who speaks in tongues when I don't know like what else to pray, and I just felt weird. And so I just started speaking in tongues. I was like, I'm not even gonna. I'm just gonna speak in tongues and just try and let the Holy Spirit really help me here. So I had a minute of that, and then I go, God, what am I feeling? Because something is off. And what God told me is that, Dakota, you cast a large amount of demons off of their sources. It's almost like taking a beehive away from the bees. Suddenly they're swarming. They are in a panic. They are, where is my energy source? Because what they had a connection to, they don't anymore. And yes, those demons are going to try to go back to the people they had originally attached to and say, can I come back? And some of this happens subconsciously, some of it consciously. But some of those people will let them back, and then they'll have their source again. But what God told me is, Dakota, because you're the one that cast them off, they're mad at you. They're mad. He goes, what you're feeling is their spiritual activity. They have not attached to you because you are not open to that. But yes, you are still feeling it. And I say, well, God, I didn't want to just unleash a bunch of like demonic bees to go find, new sources. That's not what I wanted. And so just like the conversation Jesus had with the demons and the pigs, God told me there's a place you can send them. And so what was like, I don't know, it was like a middle, it might have been, I'm trying to describe, God didn't give me a name for the place, but he showed me this place, and it was something far, it was separate. Like it was separate from our physical dimension, which is good. We don't want them around us. And so God told me to send them there. And so in Jesus' name, I did. And they all got kind of like locked up. Oh, you know what? He said, I'll build like this holding cell in a place, and you send them there. And so I did. I took that horde of them and sent them somewhere so they wouldn't just start bothering people, start bothering me. And sure enough, within 15 seconds, I felt a whole lot better. So I guess when it comes to a ton of demons, it is really helpful but rely on God for all of this, but to send them somewhere so they're not just unleashed and looking for new sources, especially with people who are, I don't know, not aware or not open to God's power in their life. That was another big story too. Okay. So I'm going through our questions. Do we need to ask God to send angels to protect and be with us, or do we have angels with us? That's a great question. So God, when you have accepted Jesus into your heart, God's going to make sure you have what you need. Like there are some things that are considered a prayer that you don't even have to ask for, and God is going to be supplying that. But it can also be really empowering. I've been introduced to this concept recently of like God, this paradox of surrender and empowerment. And Jesus, so often, he was the full empowerment of God, but when he went around talking with people, there were some times where he empowered them, like walk and sin no more. That's empowerment when you haven't been able to walk. And there are other times where he would tell people, get like sell everything and then follow me, to that one rich guy that wanted to follow him. He goes, sell everything. And so it was kind of like he really sharply humbles some people, and he really strongly empowers other people. And when I ask God about this, and I also experience this in my life or see this with people, there are some times where I need to fully surrender, and there's other times where I need to step up into God's authority in my life. And different times call for different things. I don't know. So anyway, I think we all can have examples, but what Jesus is telling me is that what he told me about this kind of observation of mine is that when you are relying on something for your salvation other than God and other than Jesus, then that's when the humbleness needs to come in. That's when it's time to surrender. But if you have surrendered, and you'll see this a lot of times in people that maybe they've stayed in the surrender side of things maybe too long because they're like, I'm just a sinner, I'm poor, I'm lowly. And like, you kind of need to say that maybe at the beginning of your faith journey, but if you've surrendered, God also wants to empower you. He wants to empower you to, well, as I've experienced my life recently, go around healing and like encouraging people and casting out this dark stuff. That's a kind of empowerment. And so we can swing. We can swing. Sometimes we're going to need the surrender and sometimes we're going to need the empowerment. But I think Jesus had fully surrendered to God and therefore had taken up God's empowerment. And that's what we so admire. So that to say, sometimes asking God, or like, I would like angels, or God, I want some angels on this situation. That can be a side of your empowerment. There are times where God has said, Dakota, yeah, now you're the leader of your angel squad. Okay. You can literally directly tell them what to do. And other times I tell God, you direct them. I don't need to be in control right now. I trust you to direct my angels. And both are appropriate and you need both at different times. So God will make sure you have your angels, but you can also directly say in Jesus's name, angels, go to this situation, help with this. And both are good.
If you have a spirit guide or you know someone that has a spirit guide, then I would immediately use the test on whatever or whoever that guide is. There are rare instances where your spirit guide is an angel of God, and that'd be wonderful if so, but more often than not, they're going to be a demon pretending to be exactly what you want to see in order to lead you astray and steal your energy. And you don't have to give in to that. So right now I'm going to say a prayer over you because I've prayed this many times over myself and people that I am praying for, and it works amazingly well. In Jesus' name, any spirit that can hear my voice that's attached to this listener that is not of God, if you do not align with Jesus Christ, then right now I bind you and cast you away, cast you to the feet of Jesus. And in that space that's now empty, Holy Spirit and angels of God, we invite you in. Thank you for your love. And dear listener, thank you for seeking God with everything you have, because He is seeking us with everything He has. I hope you have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening. I'll see you next time. Bye.